And hello to everyone. Hopefully you can see a title page here. As we do try a different approach here, as you're part of my lifelong pursuit of destroying PowerPoint everywhere. So I'm glad to be joining everybody in this process. This is a topic that's been very important to me because really my entire pursuit of lean over the last 25 years has really centered around getting the behaviors right in the organization from one end to the other. So as I go through this, I'm going to share a lot of stories. I'm going to share a lot of tactics, a lot of specific ideas and experiences that we've had because we don't want to approach this abstractly. We want to approach this with things that we can go do. And so I want to do it, and I'll spend most of my time on how, and I encourage you to ask lots of questions as we go. So let me get started here, and I encourage you to follow up via Twitter and other means as after the fact, and certainly please ask good questions. I really love the questions that we get. So why do behaviors matter so much for continuous improvement? Well, this isn't really a formula. This is kind of a formula that we've centered around that really drives the results that we start to see. So it starts with our principles. Another word for that is beliefs or mental models. Also values is used. Values is often sort of meant to be a broader term, but it's really a synonym. They all mean how we think, our thought process. And there's a lot of different principles and beliefs. There's what we call surface level beliefs. I've been inside all day. I might believe that it's a nice day outside, and if I just walk outside and get rained on, I know it's not. It doesn't take a lot of data to change those beliefs. And then there's deeply held beliefs. That's who we are. That's our personality. That's how we were raised. We're really talking about the stuff that's in the middle. It's probably invisible to us. It's not easy to change, but it's very feasible to change, and we see it happen all the time. How this shows up is with our behaviors. That's the visible part of our principles. We can't see how somebody thinks. That's impossible. We can only see how they act. And we can surmise how they think based on how they act, but we could often get that wrong. Behaviors are observable, but I might see one behavior, and the principle behind it is what I call malicious compliance. They are doing what they're supposed to do, but they don't really support it. Or they could be all in and doing it for the right reasons. I may not be able to distinguish in the behavior unless I see enough instances that I have enough data. The instance of behavior is the action. It's that's the point of action. That's the single occurrence. Behaviors is the pattern, where action is the point. And then this ultimately determines the results that we get. The problem is that most lean journeys and most continuous improvement journeys and most change efforts at all focus almost entirely on this. We tell people, go do 5S, go do this, go do that, and this is the result you're going to get. And I'll share a story about why that doesn't work, and why ultimately, if we want sustainable change, we need to be focused up here. We need to be changing how people think. We need to be changing the behaviors that they get. Now, we can't just go in and tweak a button and change how people think. It's the experiences, and they have to act their way into that thought process. And those are the tactics we're going to spend most of our time on today. So here's how this fits together with all the other pieces you see with continuous improvement. And this is a lens or a model that we call an operating system. We all have an operating system. Every organization does. Most of them are designed by accident. They are simply the product of all the different decisions that we make. One component of this are the systems and systems and processes. This is how work is done. It's not just computer systems, obviously. It's how our processes and how our work is generated. We also have the skills and tools. So if we were talking about a skill and a tool of value stream mapping, it would fit into a system of planning and strategizing. And then we have evaluation and metrics, which I very deliberately split out because people think evaluation is metrics, and metrics is just one tool in the evaluation system. So at the center of all this are the principles and behaviors. We need all four components to really have a true operating system. So it's not that principles and behaviors are the only thing that matter. It's that all four of these have to work together. They have to support each other. So if I have a system that supports every person every day trying to make improvement, so that part would be up here and we design that system. But then I only evaluate people based on big improvements. One big improvement a year gets them going. And my principles and behaviors is that we do that ourselves. We go out and we start to drive one big improvement versus every person every day. So they wouldn't be consistent. We could build a system, but we don't have all the pieces that make that work. So when we start to think about an operating system, we had a story, a situation, a journey at Chrysler, which ultimately I would call a failure. The journey through the 1990s for Chrysler was developing the Chrysler operating system. And the Chrysler operating system became one of the most benchmark systems in the world, and Chrysler became the most profitable car company in the world, significantly surpassing what Toyota was doing at that time. And we had defined the systems and processes, the skills and tools, the evaluation and metrics. But the principles were never really explored. And as a result, things worked very well as long as everybody could stay on script. But what happened is that one by one, the old principles and behaviors would come out and affect all the rest of the things, all the other components of this system. And ultimately, after some time, and the leaders that were designing the system and really living this system and carried the thinking with them left, the system left with them. And it all started to fall apart. And so the point is that we need to make sure that we have all of those components working together. I want to share where I started this. I certainly didn't have this understanding when we started the journey at Chrysler, but there was an early experience for myself when I was at Harley-Davidson. And this is really where I started my journey a long time ago. And I was a material handler, I was a materials manager that was worried about a Kanban or pull system. And so Kanban system has cards. In this case, this is 25 years ago, so we didn't have a lot of digital technology. And it would send a signal back to a supplier who would provide parts to the internal customer. And what would happen is we had all sorts of shortages. We would constantly have trouble building product because we didn't have the right parts. And so what my boss wanted me to do was go in and destroy this system and replace it with a scheduled system that would just say at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, pick up this part at this time. Well, I went out and I did some observations. So I went out, used my eyeballs, went to the Gemba, did direct observation, saw what was going on. What I saw was that the system worked fine. It was the behaviors that were wrong. People would grab cards ahead of time just to kind of get the ball rolling. They would stack extra parts when they were chroming them just to get a little ahead of the game. And what happened is they all thought they were doing the right thing. But what they were doing as a result was destroying the system. And so, again, we can have all the systems that we want. We can have all the tools that we want. We can have all the right metrics that we want. But if we don't get the behaviors right, we're not going to have the results that we really want. So what I'm going to share with you are 3 categories of tactics. They fall under this. This phrase, which we developed a while ago, is learn, apply, reflect. Now, another term for this is head, hand, heart. And here's what we're trying to do with these components. First, we need to understand it. We need to get it into our head. If we don't understand the behavior, it's not going to be able to be replicated. So we need to create understanding. If I don't understand it, it's not going to go very far. Then we have to create experiences for people. That's the hand. We are a product of our experiences. And so if we want to have people believe different things, we have to create new experiences for them. And reflect is the internalization. So that's kind of where we use the word heart. It is where it goes from belief to internalization, from understanding to belief to internalization. Because just because we understand something does not mean we believe it, does not mean we've internalized it. So this is, I want to be very clear about this. This is not a linear thing. We don't do one, and then we do the next, and then we do the next. This is a combination. So we need all three components. And what I see most leaders do when they try to drive behavior change is they try one thing, find out it doesn't work. Try another thing, find out it doesn't work. Try another thing, find out it doesn't work. Well, just based on this premise is that no way is that going to be enough. We really need a combination of experiences that come together to help people understand, experience, and internalize those behaviors. And once we do all of those things, now I have beliefs. Now I have principles. And so what I'm going to share with you is tactics for each one of these categories. And we're going to focus on them around really what are the different levers I can pull as I put together a strategy. You don't need all of them. I'm not going to suggest that's at all the case. You don't need every single tactic, but you make choices based on the circumstances you're in, including the role that you're in. And there's many that I'm going to show you that are free. Now, those are often the hardest ones to do, so they're not easy. I mean, we're talking about behavior change here, so easy is kind of already out the window. It's not going to be easy, but it doesn't have to require a big budget. We can change behavior just by having a deliberate plan, executing it well. So let me start with the learn step. So when we think about learn, we are going to talk about 4 specific tactics that we can take to make that work. One is training. Now, training doesn't necessarily mean, just go and stick people in a classroom. We still have to do it well, and I'll share a couple thoughts on that. I heard a great phrase the other day. I think it's actually from Amai, is that training is for cats and dogs. Learning is for people. And so, again, training, just because we stick people in a classroom doesn't mean we need to throw PowerPoint at them and just run them through that, but it's still a very useful tool in our toolbox. It has some pluses and minuses to it. The pluses are that we have control over it. We know what people are going to experience. We know what they're going to go through. We know what the content is. It's also very efficient. We can get a lot of content out to a lot of people in a short period of time. And so that helps a great deal. Now, it also has some minuses. One is it's disconnected. It's not, we aren't talking about your work right now. I'm just sharing content. So we aren't talking about this in your environment, at your point of activity, with a situation you have. We also treat it as one size fits all. And so, we didn't survey you all and say, what exactly do you want to hear? We threw out a topic that we thought was interesting to a lot of people, and you decided to sign up or not. But we don't get to tailor it to every individual participant in the class. We certainly tried to as much as we can with stories and examples and interaction and all sorts of those things, but that's just doing the best we can with an imperfect situation. Now, if we're going to do training, I want to make sure we do it well. There's a lot of different ways to be thinking about training. One of our favorite approaches is what we call cascade training. And cascade training is simply where what we do is we take some content, and we might have the president or the CEO train the VPs. And the VPs turn around and they train their directors. The directors turn around and they train the managers, and on you go. And this is great, because if I'm taking this class and I'm listening to my president, I'm going to give it a little more attention. Not only because it's coming from a source that matters to me, but also because I know that they're going to understand whether I got it or not afterwards. But also, if I have to then turn around and train other people, I better really make sure I prepare and understand the content, because I don't want to look like a fool in front of my direct reports. Now, obviously, you do something like this. This is going to require both some time and some dollars. But it doesn't have to, right? That doesn't always have to work that way. A great way to do some training is simply with book clubs. And I'll just use this example because it's something that I did. I was in an operation where we were on second shift. No trainers would come and work with us. And so we actually took a couple books. We handed out a chapter. Everybody read a chapter each week. We met at 9 p.m. on Tuesday nights. And each person would take a turn leading the group. We'd read the chapter. We'd discuss what it means to us. We'd come up with an assignment. We says, here's what we're going to do about it. We put it into action, and the next week we'd come back and take the next chapter. So just because we say training doesn't mean that it needs to cost a lot. So the next tactic in the learning step is coaching, which is really what I spend most of my time ending up doing. And coaching is great because it flips around these concerns. So it solves all the problems of training and also introduces destroys all the benefits. So how does it fail? Well, it's highly variable. It all depends on the situation, the coach, and the coachee. And it's also very inefficient. It takes a lot of hours to coach and get that much content across. And I see, as I'm spelling here, that when you do this live, you get caught misspelling words. I'm just going to leave that alone. The benefits are that it's highly connected to your work, because it is in the work, at the point of activity, with the problem that you face with the person. So it's highly connected, highly relevant, and it's highly custom. So it's based on what you need. I don't spend time talking about things you already know. I spend time working with you on the gaps that you have. And so for every failure that we have in training, we pick it up as a benefit in coaching and vice versa. Now, how do we do this? Now, we can certainly be better at coaches. We can pick up tools and skills and mentalities and behaviors around being a coach. The one most important thing that I want to emphasize in being a coach is that there's a big difference between coaching people towards a solution and coaching people towards a method. So you have to ask yourself, which one am I doing? Am I coaching people towards a solution, which is usually my solution? Am I coaching on them how to do the work, how to come up with the idea, how to make the improvements? So a big difference between those two. When I work with one organization that has very few lean experts in their organization, and so they start looking around and say, we can't do coaching because we don't know what we're talking about. Well, if we give them a skill of coaching, even if they don't know how to do continuous improvement, they can still coach each other by asking the right questions and playing the right role. And all we're trying to do is help people go down the right path of what they're trying to do. One of my favorite tactics that often gets missed is the purposeful use of language. Language is a powerful tool to get ideas across. And so when we choose our words carefully, when we design words to be used as an educational tool, it can be a very powerful weapon. So I'll give you a couple examples. A lot of you, as organizations, might like to say that you are customer-centric or customer-focused. And that sounds good, but most organizations I meet use a similar phrase. It isn't really that compelling. It has to look long and hard to find a company that isn't at least somewhat customer-focused. They might be vaguely aware that there's customers out there, but those aren't many. Amazon.com doesn't use that language. They use the words customer-obsessed. Now, without describing what that means, you immediately have a different image about what that means. Now, all by itself, that doesn't get you very far. I need to do more than simply introduce the language. But just by introducing the language, I get the idea across to other people that there's a different purpose behind when we say customer. Another example is at a company called Flinchable Engineering. Flinchball Engineering is 100% employee-owned. It went that way a little while ago, several years ago, 60% for a while, now it's 100%. Great company, very engaged employees. And they use the word shareholder. So you were never introduced as an employee. You're not an employee or an associate or a team member. You are a shareholder. And you will be referred to as a shareholder every single opportunity, because it is a way to introduce people the idea, the principle, the belief, the behavior of acting differently as a shareholder. It's not enough to give somebody a share in the company. They have to believe that a certain behavior goes along with that. And so what's nice about language is it's free. It doesn't cost us anything, but we do have to be very careful about how we think about it and how we use it. The last one I talk about in the learn phase is I actually do hesitantly, mostly because we do it very poorly, but it's benchmarking. What I say when we do it poorly is, we like to go on a trip. I'll test exactly how poor my artistic skills are here. But we go on a trip. We like to go visit a company. We go visit some company and see what's going on at that organization. And we come up with some ideas. Say, ooh, we should adopt those ideas. Well, only if those ideas solve a real problem that you have. So what real benchmarking should look like is understand what problems you have. Go find a good company that has solved that. Go understand how their solution has helped them solve that problem. And then test it in your own environment. So when I was at DT Energy, we wanted to demonstrate to the executive team a different set of behaviors around the role of a leader. So we found an organization about an hour drive away that we felt did a lot of things poorly, but what they really did right was the leadership engagement. Everywhere you went, you saw the leaders on the floor and you saw them in a supportive role. And so we took that group of executives and we visited this particular company. Now, all by itself, that wasn't enough, but it was a component of saying, this is what it looks like. This is the idea that we want you to emulate. So those are 4 tactics in the learn step. And the learn step is absolutely essential. It's not as hard as what we're going to cover next, which is the apply step, but it is very, very important. So in the apply step, I'm going to talk about 5 tactics. And here's where we give people new experiences. So I'm going to talk about them as some formal experiences we can create for people and some informal. And this is where we often have to get creative. So one role in the formal side is how we leverage events. Whether they're rapid improvement events or Kaizen events or simply projects. So an example, in one hospital we were working with, we had a series of projects going on where the team was working on rapid improvement. Not a rapid improvement event, but sort of continuous improvement, every person every day, but focused around a narrow team. So it wasn't the entire hospital, it was a handful of people. And so what we asked is that any time that they ran into a problem, with whatever improvement they were trying to make, we wanted the president and the CMO to stop what they were doing, wherever that was, and come to the point of activity. And work with that person to break through that barrier. Now, this isn't a sustainable practice. This isn't how we're going to solve every problem in a hospital. That would be crazy, and there's no way we have resources to do that. But the point was, it was an experience for those people to understand what it's like for the team at the front line to make an improvement every day. And what they find is little things that seem like they should be easy, and the leader of the organization not understanding why it wasn't. And every time they got called to the floor, to the front line, to the point of activity, they found out that the seemingly simple stuff was actually very, very hard. And so those were creating experiencers for them. They were an event for them. They were part of the improvement event. And their role wasn't to help them with the improvement. Their role was to learn what problems the organization's really experienced. Another side of the formal category is giving people new roles. I don't mean necessarily new jobs, but because we play a lot of roles in the organization that aren't necessarily our job title. So my favorite examples of this is a organization I was working with in Israel that had a really engaged continuous improvement steering team. It was made up of all the most passionate people in the organization around continuous improvement. And they came together and they met and they talked and they led the organization, and all the other leaders in the organization would sit on the fence and be led by the steering team. None of them stepped up and took it to the next level because the steering team are the ones who had the ball. So what we did is we asked some of the steering team members, these passionate people who were driving continuous improvement, we asked them, if we kicked you off the steering team, will you continue to be passionate about lean? Absolutely. Will you have more time to apply lean on an everyday basis? Probably. Okay, well, we're going to kick you off the team. Now, they really didn't want to leave this team. They put so much into leading this effort. We said, we want you to go back to your role and focus on just being a really good leader every day. And we're going to invite some of these fence sitters onto the committee, and they're going to help lead it. Now, those fence sitters could no longer sit on the fence. They either had to jump in, because now they were expected to lead it, or leave, which a couple of them did. So we gave them a new role where they were sitting on the fence, and not because we needed them to, but because it forced them to experience lean by asking them to lead it. Now, the informal, these are often more powerful because there are things that we can build into the everyday fabric of the organization. The first, which I actually previewed this presentation talking about on Mark's blog, is forced habits. And we actually do this all the time. Right? We don't try to convince our kids that brushing their teeth is good for them and then try to logically appeal to them and give them an incentive to brush their teeth. No, we pretty much demand it. It is a forced habit. If they go to bed and they didn't brush their teeth, we drag them out and we go make them brush their teeth. It's not that we're being disrespectful of them. It's not that we don't respect their ability to make their decision, but we override that right in a situation where we know more than they do. So as an example of this, when I was in an organization leading an operation, I had a situation where people would come to our daily meeting. We had a daily meeting talking about performance, and all the other leaders would come to this meeting and talk about the previous day's problems. And we try and solve it. We debate and argue and go nowhere, really. And when I started testing it, I realized that nobody on the team, nobody in the room had actually seen the problems we were discussing. So I put in a rule. It was a rather draconian rule, but it worked. And it is, you do not get an opinion unless you've seen the problem. Now, what this was meant to do was, before we have our meeting, go and see the problem, come to the meeting, and then let's have a fruitful discussion. Now, everybody wants to have an opinion, so they made sure that they went off to go see the problem. And sure enough, that certainly improved our meeting, but that wasn't really why I was doing it. What really happened is they started going to observe all their problems, because they had that much of experience where when they started going to see the problem, they learned something. And that experience helped them change their belief about what they thought they knew and what they really knew. And so that turned into a new behavior for them that lasted beyond my meeting. In another organization, in a board of directors I sat on, the team had a really hard time thinking strategically. So we put a forced habit on there. Every board meeting, they would come to us with departmental presentations. Here's the HR department. Here's the operations department. Here's the finance department. And so we said, no, once we have a strategy, that's the only thing we want to hear about. You have 5 strategic points, and all we want to hear is 5 strategic points. Well, the first meeting was a disaster. All they did was they took the first set of slides that they would normally present, and they just tried to reorganize them into 5 categories of the strategy. It didn't make sense. It was a horrible board meeting. Everybody was confused. But we insisted on it. And they did that over and over and over until it became a habit. They thought about their presentation in terms of strategy. They thought about their plans in terms of strategy. And once we just started forcing them thinking through what they did, in our case, just in a presentation, then they started to think that way through other aspects of life. So forced habits is a useful way to give people an experience. And we also have role model. And role model is one of my favorite, but it's also one of the most poorly done. And here's why. You're not being a role model unless somebody sees you do it. Okay, so if you do the right thing when nobody's looking, good for you. That's the right thing to do. But that's not being a role model. Being a role model means somebody has to see you do it. And they have to understand it. So if we don't let somebody see it, it's not being a role model. This doesn't mean we fabricate experiences, but we may have to plan them. We may have to stage them a bit. They still might be genuine, but we need to create experiences where we get to role model in a visible way the right behavior. Now this is uncomfortable for people because it feels like bravado. It feels like bragging. It feels like showing off. Hey, look at me. Look at, I can be lean too. But that's just tough. That's the price we pay for being a leader. It's going to be uncomfortable. But you can't be a role model unless somebody sees you do it. So we have a leader in one organization as their effort to be a role model is every meeting that they go to, if you sit down with this person, they are going to ask you to do an A3. They're going to break out a sheet, and if you're going to talk about a problem, then let's define the problem state. If we want to talk about the current states, then let's talk about the current states. And so they role model that behavior every time. If they're bringing an idea to you, they're going to bring you an A3. And if they're asking you to bring an idea, they're either going to expect it or they're going to pull one out and make you go through it. So when we start to role model, again, we have to do it in a visible way. So another one, which is really in between, it's both, we get both formal and informal, is recognition and reaction. So this isn't just about reward. Reward can be a form of recognition. But it's really about how we react to the things that we have going on. And this is both removing the negatives and creating the positives. So as an example of removing the negatives, when I was in an operation, when I was leading an operation, I was paid based on safety, quality, delivery, cost, and morale. And so these things determined my bonus. However, I would only get a phone call. So the phone would only ring from the COO of the organization when I missed on delivery. Well, we tried to set up an incentive that said all of these were important. But they weren't all important because the phone only rang when delivery was missed. And this sent a message to the organization that it really was delivery that mattered. Big D delivery mattered, and everything else was secondary. Well, this clearly wasn't what we intended, so we had to remove that negative. Now, I started by trying to remove it by just not letting anybody know that they called. But no matter how hard I tried, the secret got out. Everybody somehow knew. So then we had to have a tough adult conversation where we said, look, you either need to beat me up for all of this stuff or stop beating me up for delivery. But we can't continue to only make phone calls when we miss on delivery. So that was the removal of a negative reaction that was creating an experience for people that was driving the wrong behavior. So recognition and reaction happens in a lot of ways. Worked with one organization that was really good at recognition. So if they sat a bunch of people together in a meeting and they had an agenda, first on the agenda was always recognition. Who wants to say who did a good job? Who wants to say thank you? Who wants to say great job? Whatever they want to do, they created an opportunity in all their meetings to do that. However, when they started doing that, what they noticed was what they would recognize people for was putting out the fires. So they would ask people to, put out the fires, and they'd say, good job, you put out the fire in your apartment. Your apartment fell apart. And you guys worked really hard. You worked 13-hour days. You did everything you could. And now that fire is doused. But the problem is that same person owned the department. They owned the match. And so what we were really doing was rewarding the arsonist. Because we're providing recognition for someone for putting out their own fires. So all we asked people to do, which was a hard thing to do, but again, another free thing to do, was we just asked people to start to give recognition for doing systematic things, putting out the fires before they got started, putting in good checks, putting in good support, helping each other, developing resources, whatever it might be. Let's stop recognizing people for heroic firefighting. Let's start recognizing people for doing the proactive, preventive stuff. And so they had the recognition opportunity, but what do we choose to recognize people for makes a big deal. This often happens. This is why I talk about recognition and reward. Reward is just a part of that. And here's what happens in a lot of organizations. A person comes along and they have an idea. And their idea is going to save a bunch of money. So in order to create a reward, we say, well, we're going to take 10% of that and we're going to give it back to you as a reward. So the behavior that drives is that if that person has a whole bunch of little ideas that they think might help the organization, but none of them are worth it to make the cut for a system like that, they just discard all of them. They say little ideas don't matter. Only big ideas won't do. Only ones that I can get some money for. And so we have to be very careful when we develop reward systems for continuous improvement, because my experience, 3 out of 4 times, they become counterproductive. So then we'll move on to the last stage of this, and then we'll open it up for questions, and this is the reflect stage. I don't know if reflect is the most important, but I will say that without it, it just isn't going to go very far. We don't internalize. And this is how we get people to think about what they're doing. So one way to do this is with events. Formal reflection. So one of my favorite tools from this, we actually borrowed from the U.S. Army, is called the After Action Review. It's a way to build in reflection. And it's just basically 4 questions. I'll write them in an abbreviated form. One is, what was supposed to happen? What was our plan? Did we even go into the event, whatever that event was, with a good plan? Second is, well, what did happen and why? What was our current state? What actually occurred? Now, to do that, we're going to have to observe during the event. Third, what can we learn? What weaknesses can we improve? And what strengths can we sustain? What worked, which I actually think is more important than people give it credit for. Just because it's working well doesn't mean that it's self-sustaining. And then last, what are we going to do? What's our action? How are we going to build new standards, new high agreements about how we operate based on what we just learned? And so reflection can happen a lot of different ways. Here's a really missed opportunity in my experiences. We put people through a Kaizen event or a rapid improvement event or whatever you call it. We stick people in a room for 3 to 5 days to work heads down focus on one really serious process improvement. And then we get to the end and we send them all back to their jobs. What do? Catch up on email. They don't change anything in their behavior based on going through that event. So all we need to do is take 10 minutes at the end of that Kaizen event or rapid improvement event and ask people, what did you learn or experience in this event that you can carry back to your own work? And we kind of hope that just by osmosis, they're going to do that on their own. Well, we find some people that, that weekend they sit down, they think about why that was successful, and they try to take some lessons away from it. But those are the exceptions. We need to help people by creating those reflection opportunities. Now, the other way we create reflection is through questions. The questions that we ask people, and I don't mean requests for information. That's not it. And I don't mean advocacy kind of questions. I mean questions that force people to think. There is no answer to most of these questions. There's information, there are answers, but there's no single answer to those questions. They force people to think. You get into their head. So as an example of this, worked with one leader who every time somebody would come to him and propose anything, whether it was people sitting in the staff, as his peers, one of his direct reports, another department, he would always ask the same thing. What problem are you working on? He would ask people that question all the time, to the point where people started to turn it into a joke just to have fun. Oh, what do you want to go for lunch? Well, What problem are you trying to solve? So they'd have some fun with it, but at the end of the day, they all knew that half the time he asked that question, none of them knew what problem they were working on, yet they already had a solution. So he carried that question around with him, and he didn't have to do a whole lot else. He asked that question several times a day. Just by asking the question, it exposed people to the gaps in their own thinking. And it helped internalize them because they were trained on how to do problem solving. This wasn't a training gap. They had done problem solving, so they knew how to do it. They hadn't internalized problem solving. And so they weren't even asking themselves, what problem am I trying to solve? Worked with another CEO who would do calls with his different groups. And he had sites all over the country. And it was actually called an innovation call. And he'd call each one, and they'd tell them about all his innovations. He'd call another one, and they'd tell them about all his innovations. But he would never see the same thing twice, going from location to location to location. So he added one question to his innovation call. What idea did you steal from someone else? And so the first time I participated in this call, when he did it the first time, and he asked the general manager, what question did you steal, or what idea did you steal from someone else? And the silence, you could almost hear the silence. You could hear people turning their head and looking at each other and saying, who's got something? Because none of them did. And they realized that. This was a moment of insight, of internalization, of reflection that said, you know what? We have 84 other locations out there. One of them has to have a decent idea. Maybe we have the best. Something out there is worth stealing. So pretty soon he started going along and seeing ideas stolen from each other just because they started to realize this was a behavior that they had missed. So the point is, again, we go back to this, and we need all three of these. We need learn, apply, reflect. And we need to develop tactics in each one of these categories, regardless of our budget, so that we have a deliberate strategy to design our culture instead of end up with the accidental culture. The culture created as a product of all our unplanned experiences instead of our planned experiences. So this has been a tool that I found very helpful to work with leaders, to build strategies, to reflect on their own impact on the organization, and encourage you to try and use it as well.